If you've been using NeoVim or Vim for some time, then you will reach a point where it's no longer overwhelming and you're becoming a lot more comfortable with not only the Vim motions, but with your own configuration, installing plugins, understanding the correct balance of plugins. Because if you get too many plugins or you use too many plugins, you may find that some of them break sometimes or whatever it may be. And so this video is really aimed at some of the plugins that I recommend and that I use that may not be typically used by other users of NeoVim. The plugins that I'm going to demonstrate here, they're discipline related to try and improve the way that I use NeoVim. When you are an intermediate or when you're a beginner and you're getting more comfortable, is you may have developed some bad habits. And that's the first thing that I want to touch on in this video. The first time that you get your head around hjkl in terms of navigating around text and editing your code, it takes a little bit of time to get used to that if you're coming from the arrow keys or you're coming from the mouse. And it's definitely an improvement on the arrow keys alone. The mouse, I'm not sure. I'm not a big mouse user, but the thing about hjkl is that the more you learn about the Vim motions, the less that you should be using those keys. And on the right-hand side here, I've got this plugin. It's called Hardtimeenvm. And there are other versions or iterations of this specific plugin and what it's trying to do. But ultimately what it's trying to do is it's trying to, as it says here, help you establish good command workflow and habits. So it wants to get you out of using, for example, hjkl, or I'm going to demonstrate some of the other motions that you could shorten the amount of motions that you use. And so this is a plugin that initially I installed thinking, okay, I'm going to use this for a week or two, and then once I've kind of got into the good habits, I am going to uninstall. But the thing is, once you get the hang of it and once you instill the good discipline with respect to using the right Vim motions, the right commands, then you no longer really conflict with this plugin. And so it's not a big plugin. It doesn't slow down the configuration, and therefore I've just left it there. And every now and again, it gives me a reminder that something I'm doing isn't necessarily a good approach. So there are some recommended workflows here. So there's some good examples, and I'll take you through that in a moment. And then we've got some installation here. I'm using Lazyenvm. If you are using Packer or you're using Plug, even if you're still on vanilla Vim, then go ahead and you're going to have to, you should be at this stage comfortable with the configuration syntax for your specific plugin manager. But in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to open my configuration up. If you don't have a configuration yet, I would suggest that this video is probably a little too soon. You need to build your either custom configuration, which you can look at the video NeoVim from scratch that I did, which I will link. And also you could take the approach of using one of the out-of-the-box solutions like NVChat or Leapenvm. They're really good. And certainly if you want to quickly get up to speed, you can use them. The reason that I do a custom configuration is that I am a tinkerer at heart, and I just want to know how every single thing works, and I want to get a configuration that works for me. Some people will argue that they spend too much time on their NeoVim configuration. And the balance is you need to decide, do you want, say, maybe a dozen plugins and no more, and then just really keep it to a scope that you can manage, and then you'll find that it's going to break less? Or do you want to have a ton of plugins and be in there all the time and be tinkering and that kind of thing? So that's just something to think about. So assuming that you've got your NeoVim configuration, I'm now going to go into mine, which is using Lazyenvm. And so I'm going to go to the plugins. In here, we've got Hardtime, and that's the plugin that I've already referenced on the right-hand side. And the installation is pretty similar. So we've just got the GitHub URL, of course, which is over here. We've got the commands so that you can always toggle it on or off if it's annoying you or something like that. You can see the available commands there. And the event in which it gets invoked, so it's going to be asleep or it's not going to actually be loaded until it gets on buffer enter, which is just handy. And that's something which Lazyenvm is really good with respect to its name. It only loads stuff when it's necessary. we've got two dependencies here, and these dependencies, this is just telling NeoVim or Lazy, the plugin manager, that we need to load these two before we load Hardtime. And in my case, I'm not really passing any options. You can have a look into the options in your own mode, but this is ultimately a really simple plugin. So I'm just going to demonstrate now some of the things that may benefit, and I'll go to a more kind of interesting file. You can see here that they're using their options file. So why don't I do that? I'm just going to go, and I'm going to go to the my options file. So you should have something that looks kind of similar to this. It's just where I've declared all the options or the sets for my configuration. Now, if you're a beginner, then you want to say get down here. Let's say we want to turn off numbers, for example. Let's just some arbitrary example. We've got opt.number, and that's true down here. And if you're a beginner, what you might do is you might just keep hitting J. But as you can see here, I'm hitting it and it keeps on coming up with this warning. You pressed the J key too soon. So let's go back to the top, and let's say now that we've got this plugin Hardtime, it's given us a few kind of tips in terms of what the recommended workflows are to instill better Vim disciplines and have better Vim motions that is ultimately going to level up our productivity. So the first thing is we can use this relative jump. So you may already be aware of this. You could either say 1.7 and then J, and now we're down on this line. And so immediately, because you're prevented from using hjkl more than twice by default, I'm sure you can change it in the options. And the arrow keys are actually disabled. So if I hit up or down, it's going to say the up and down keys are disabled. The mouse is also disabled by default. And so this is kind of pushing you to make a better approach. So that's obviously not the only way. The other thing that you could do, you could use the open bracket, and then that's going to take you skip to the next blank line. That's one option. If you want to move down the file, then you could Control E is going to do that. If you want to move up, then you can use Control Y. Control U will jump up, and Control D will jump down. So these are some ways, and I'm going to look at another file in a moment where we can demonstrate some others as well. We've got these here: Control U, Control D, B, and F. GG obviously takes you to the top of the file, so you should know this by now, that capital G takes you to the bottom, GG takes you to the top. We've got Control B, Control F. So all of those. And then the word motion, which is probably going to be a little bit clearer in, say, another file. So let's go and have a look at a slightly more complicated file. I'm going to just look at, let's have a look at this one, yeah. So you don't need to be too concerned here with what this code is doing. Just imagine that you are new to this code base and you're trying to inspect it and you just want to work out what's going on. So the first thing that you might do is you might say, okay, I want to get down there onto line 7, that map key. And so what you might do, you might say, we're going to say 7 down, and now all of a sudden we're here. If we might have said, oh, I really want to call this map keys. This is just an example, but what we could do, we could go to the end of the word with using E, or we can go to the start of the word, the next word with W, or we could use B to go back. So this is obviously not much better, but you can see that I'm use just E, and I'm jumping these words a lot quicker. The other thing that you could do, for example, is you might say, okay, I'm going to use F, and I am going to find let's say the close on the leader. And so immediately you're starting to think of different ways that you can approach your navigation within the file and be a lot better. Of course, we can also prefix things with a number. So you might say like 5W, and that'll take you 5 words ahead. And obviously the treatment of NeoVim with respect to words, identifying there the quote as a word, and that'll make sense to you if you've gone through the Vim tutor and you're familiar with the different categorizations. So there's those, and then we also have So I've touched on some of these, and of course, like you can go to the end of the line with the $sign. You can go to the beginning non-white space with the little hat symbol. So these are all some just examples. Now, the next one that I want to show you is, let's say you're like, Rad, you're telling me stuff that I don't know. Fair enough. But one thing that I always fall into the habit of doing is, say I want to change this word, right? And instead of saying LSP Saga Finder, it should have been LSP Saga Seeker. I don't know, just as an example. So now, what I would always do, and I still fall into this habit, I always say DW to delete the word, and then I'll immediately press I. But you'll see down the bottom, it's telling you should have used CWI. So you would have actually saved a complete stroke if we said change word. Now we're already in insert mode, so now we can input that there. So that is something which has obviously done a lot for me. That for some reason I picked up that really bad habit where I would always go and use delete and then go into insert mode, which is unnecessary. They might be really tiny things, but they ultimately will add up over time. The other thing is you can use the percentage sign to move between the brackets. So that's something to think about as well. So that plugin, Hardtimeenvm, is just something that I wanted to introduce here and has helped me to improve my Vim workflow. Once you've been using Hardtime for a little while and you're finding that your navigation, generally speaking, is vastly improved, you're navigating much more quickly through the code, then you may find that you even want to level that up. And one of the best ways to really speed up your navigation within the visual text or the text or code that you are editing is to use Leapenvm. And on the right hand side, I've got the GitHub repository, of course, and I will link that again in the video description. It is, as it describes here, a general purpose motion plugin for NeoVim. And it builds on Vim Sneak, which if you ever use that with the vanilla Vim, then that may be familiar. But ultimately, this allows you to rapidly traverse your code or the text or whatever you're editing. So on the left-hand side, we've got the installation here. And so we can see the GitHub URL that installs it, the event, so that, as we know with Lazyenvm, we're just telling it when it should load on this. For this one specifically, we're going to load with buffer on enter buffer. And then as per the instructions from the GitHub repository here, we can simply call this require in the config function and add the default mappings. You can, of course, have your own default mappings, but in this example, I'm just going to stick to that. Now, let's just have a kind of demonstration, and we'll just do it in this file because I think that's going to be sufficient. So if we wanted to get to, say, add default mappings, so this function which is being called down here, well, what we might do, we could say it for down and then move across. So for JWW, not that bad, but you can imagine if that was way down here, then that might be a little bit more difficult. But what Leap does is it allows, so the key here is going to be S. So let's initiate the search. And we press S, and I'm going to say add. So I pressed A, D, and it's got the first match within that space. And we're now at the add default mappings function. Now, we'll make it a little bit more difficult. I'm going to go right back to the start. And now what I'm going to do, we can see there's two instances of Leap. And so what I'm going to do is just demonstrate how we would approach that. So let's say we would press S, and I'm going to say LE. Now you can see if we press A, we're going to go to the first one. But I'm going to do that again. So we're going to see S, LE, and we can see the S there is highlighted. So I'm going to hit S, and it's going to take us to the second one. So it's going to give us these highlighted keys, and we can then hit them, and that will take us to the match that we're viewing. Let's go to a file which is going to be a little bit bigger and we can demonstrate how we could search through this or traverse our code using some of the other keys that are available. So let's go to, I'm going to just have a look at the options again. I feel like that's the least intimidating for newcomers. So we have this option here, and imagine now I just said S and then OPT. Obviously this is a silly example, but I'm going to do that again. So we go, so S, OP. Now we've got all of these. We could hit A to get down to line 23. We could hit E to get to line 11. We could also just hit enter, and then it's going to take us through all of the matches. And then when we get there, we can just hit escape and we'll land on that. Now, there are a lot of other options available with NVim Leap, and admittedly, I don't use this plugin all that much. Just sometimes if I'm maybe in a text file or something like that, or I really want to navigate quickly, I feel that I've become, for the vast majority of cases, the built-in Vim motions that we discussed with Hardtime, and instilling better discipline with respect to those is going to be enough. But if you really want to up your game with respect to traversing your code and to navigating to sections of your code quickly, then NVim Leap is going to be a game changer. If you found that useful, please definitely hit the subscribe and the like buttons. I've got a few more videos coming with respect to debugging and using NeoVim as an IDE. I appreciate any feedback that you might have, and all of the code that you saw in the video is going to be available on my GitHub. So just under the NeoVim, I'll link that in the video description. Thanks again.